Hey everyone, welcome back to Big Strong Book. I'm Reed, and today we are going over chapter 33 of the Dragonbone chair, From the Ashes of Asu'a. So this chapter is a lot of exposition, or at least of a lot of this backstory of Inuleki, the Storm King, and the role that the Norns play more of history of the Scythi. So Yarnaga talks about the Scythi and mentions the conflicts that they had with them when King Fingal came down from the north and eventually sought to kind of push them in, and the knowledge of what happened has tried to let me start that sentence over again. The preservation of that knowledge they've attempted to maintain it through the League of the Scroll, founded by Osten, the Fisher King. But anyways, so this, as the Scythies got more pushed in, it said there was one among the Scythi, Yarnaga says, who wished it otherwise and was not content to spend his last days keening over lost peace and ravaged innocence. And initially, these stories, Yarnaga recounting this tale, it doesn't really sit well with some of the members that are gathered there. One of the bishops, he starts to leave, or he does leave, and he's like, this is fantasy, this is fiction, what this guy is telling, it's just fairy tales. But Yarnaga is convinced, and later on Joshua becomes convinced just based on what they have talked about and what they have seen. But anyway, Yarnaga paints the picture of Inuleki and his brother Hakatri. Hakatri was the elder brother, was burned by kind of the fire from a worm or a dragon, and Inuleki eventually had a Hakatri shipped across the sea with one of his most loyal servants, and despite that, he was always under the shadow, like it said, under the shadow of Hakatri's fall, but blaming himself, perhaps he spent long years in the pursuit of knowledge that likely should have been barred to man and Scythi alike. At first, he may have thought that he could make his brother well, bring him back from the uncharted west, but as with all such quests, soon the search became its own reason and reward, and Ineliki, I'm going to have so much trouble pronouncing, it's Ineluki, Ineliki. I'll just say Ineliki. Ineliki, he whose beauty had once been the silent music of the palace of Asu'a, became more and more a stranger to his people, a searcher in dark places. So deep below Asu'a grew what are called the Witchwood Gardens, trees whose strange wood they used as the southern men used bronze, as the northerners used iron. And he procured black iron, which he gave to the witchwood trees as a monk waters his vines. And he wove this tree round with spells and created a new forged gray sword. And Simon remembers this. He remembers at one point in his journey seeing a gray sword, but he can't, initially in that moment, he can't really remember where he's heard that before. And when Unigado, Ineliki's father, finds out, he says, "You must destroy this. This isn't right." And Ineliki slays his father, and he says that, "From sorrow have you come to the sword, and sorrow you have brought with you. sorrow shall be your name, Jingizu. And again, Simon remembers. He remembers hearing sorrow. He remembers hearing Jingizu. He remembers hearing all of this. And his family had no force to resist him with. And Ineliki created, or with his 5 servants, they became the Red Hand, and he tried to break through the battlements of Fingal, the army that had surrounded Asu'a, and they were the Scythi were more frightened by him than anything, as one would imagine. And they escaped into the forest. And let me just see here, because the story is like long and complex, but they eventually, so Ineliki took his red hand and climbed in the last moment to the summit of the tallest tower. He had decided, it seemed clear, that when the Scythi could no longer inhabit, never become the home of men, he tried to bring it all down, and he had failed, and Asu'a still stood. And again, Simon remembers, and Ineliki died from that. And Simon remembers. He says, I saw him, and then he has a dream where he's running through this corridor, and he hears these voices talking to him like he has heard in his dreams. And he wakes up, and he's still in the room, and he realizes that he has passed out. And he also realizes in that moment that what he saw, or what Yarnaga confirms, he did not see in Ineliki. If he did, like, the damage that would have been done to his mind would have been insane. But Yarnaga presumes and assumes that he did see one of the Red Hand in that vision with Pryrates, with Elias when he got the sword, when he got sorrow. Now, and that is why the League of Scroll was made. They survived in some form, and at least their souls survived. And Morghenus was a member, Ukakuk was a member, so that old knowledge would not be lost, not only knowledge of the Scythi's Dark Lord, but other things too, for those were evil times in the north of Ostenard. Over the years, it was discovered, or rather guessed, that somehow Ineliki, or his spirit or shade, or living well, had become manifest again among the only ones who might welcome him, the Norns. And apparently Aelsten was the first one to kind of see that that the Storm King would be coming back. And Joshua confirms the fear of what he heard. And then as Simon and Benebik leave, Benebik realizes the significance of what he's seen, and they remember the dream, they remember Stormspike, and they also remember the weird of the swords. They remember the 3 swords that they saw. Then the narrative shifts to Pryrate's perspective. He feels that something has happened to Simon, and he checks in on this big project that's going on. They're building these siege engines, and Inch is the foreman. And he says he's going into the king, Elias, is going into the field in 10 days. Essentially, he needs these siege engines. And then he goes to meet with Elias, and Elias says, Nagleman must be crushed. And Pryrates tells him he is no longer your brother, he is only your enemy. But Elias pushes back. He's like, no, he is still my brother. That is why he cannot be allowed to defy me, and that he must have Miriamel back. And they assume, Pryrates assumes that she is at Nagleman with Joshua, which, I mean, that assumption is correct. And he says, he asks Pryrates, Elias does, do you think I shall sleep better when Nagleman is thrown down and I have my daughter back? And Pryrates says, I am sure, my king, good, I shall enjoy it even more. knowing that, kind of the everything being put down within Naglamund. And that's where the chapter ends. So there's one significant spoiler-ish thing that I'll talk about. So spoilers from here on out. When I think of, the tragedy of Haka-Tree in particular, obviously, and I have it behind me here, Brothers of the Wind, that fairy tale-esque story, and with Haka-Tree and his servant going into the west, and that Haka-Tree, as of the end of Into the Narrow Dark, Haka-Tree has been revived through the armor of the first navigator. And I'm very curious to see what role Haka-Tree has yet to play, or at least the shell of Haka-Tree has to play in the Navigator's Children. So that should be interesting to see. And it will, and I also think I'm really looking forward to reapproaching Brothers of the Wind again. And it was very interesting to read Brothers of the Wind after Empire of Grass, because Haka-Tree is resurrected at the end of Empire of Grass. So I'm more so looking forward to that. Really trying to maybe think throughout the course of this trilogy in particular, what role is Haka-Tree going to play? How will that kind of mirror off of Ineliki, his brother, and all of that? Because I'm sure there's a twin rhyming tale going on, or whatever Ineliki does, Haka-Tree is the inverse. So where Ineliki might cause his people to fail, Haka-Tree might be the spirit that kind of merges everybody together, and maybe Haka-Tree is the one to defeat Utuku in the Navigator's Children. So obviously we have yet to see with that. So if you have read this chapter, let me know what you think, and I will see you guys next time.